Namaste. Welcome to the second session of Sakar Darshan Talks, organized on the auspicious occasion of Mother's second and final coming to Pondicherry on April 24th, 1920. In our last talk, we had looked at the spiritual foundations of Indian culture. This is a sort of a follow-up to that talk with the theme of Indian culture and the future of humanity. I begin with a small invocation to Mother India. O our Mother, O soul of India, Mother who hast never forsaken thy children, even in the days of darkest depression, even when they turned away from thy voice, served other masters and denied thee. Now when they have arisen and the light is on thy face, in this dawn of thy liberation, in this great hour we salute thee. Guide us so that the horizon of freedom opening before us may be also a horizon of true greatness and of thy true life in the community of the nations. Guide us so that we may be always on the side of great ideals and show to men thy true visage as a leader in the ways of spirit and a friend and helper of all the people. This was invoked by the Mother on 15th August 1947, the day India got her political independence from the British. It's a prayer to Shakti, the Bharat Mata, seeking strength so that we may be always on the side of great ideals of the truth. In our last talk, we had looked at some of those great ideals that have formed the glorious spiritual culture and civilization of India. But as Sri Aurobindo reminds us so powerfully, the greatness of the ideals of the past is a promise of greater ideals for the future. So today I thought what we'll do is to explore how the truth that is at the core of Indian spiritual culture, Indian spirituality, and the gradual unfolding of the truth, how they also essentially mark the inner movement of humanity and the world towards its ultimate destiny. That destiny is to transform earthly life into a divine life, to bring down, as they say, a kingdom of God on the earth, to establish the true Ram Rajya, to bring the true reign of Dharma. All these are different conceptions given to the same aspiration hidden in the heart of humanity, that of perfecting life and world. This aspiration is there in the heart of the humanity because it is in truth a will of the divine to make the earth a heaven. And as the Indian wisdom tells us, the individual self, the Atman, is essentially one with the Paramatman, the eternal. And in Savitri also we have Sri Aurobindo speaking of the same aspiration when he writes, heaven in its rapture dreams of perfect earth. Earth in its sorrow dreams of perfect heaven. Perfecting life and world. This may seem somewhat presumptuous or over-optimistic or over-simplistic when we look around with our limited human consciousness and limited reason and limited vision and look at all the chaos, the disharmony, and the conflict in the world around. But if we could develop a vision that is free of all our mental prejudices and mental or ideological or intellectual reasonings and biases, and if we could see beneath and behind the surface and have a vision that is capable of looking at the deeper, the larger forces working behind the wave, we might be able to get a sense of how the divine will is actually working itself out in a divine way, using what Sri Aurobindo calls as the logic of the infinite. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is, are we collaborating in that work? Are we capable? And if we are not, how may we become capable of collaborating in this work of divine will working itself out in perfecting life and world. So let's try to revisit the Vedic vision that we had been exploring in our last session and see what new insights we could gain from there. The Veda speaks of a world of truth, light, and immortality, which is higher and superior to the world of our ordinary human existence. This home of the truth is also conceived as higher hemisphere of existence, or Parardha, or the triple world of Sat Chit Ananda. Sri Aurobindo calls it as Sat Chit Tapas and Ananda, pure existence, pure consciousness force, and pure bliss. This is the supreme reality from where all manifestation proceeds and with which it ultimately reunites. In contrast to that, there is the lower triple world, the lower hemisphere, or the triple world of mind, life, and body, the aparartha, manas, prana, and annam, where the truth is often, it's generally mixed with a lot of falsehood and error. Between the two is the link world of Maharloka or Vijnana, which is the plane of truth consciousness, the plane of Satyam, Ritam, Brahat, the truth, the right, and the vast. According to Veda, this is the cosmological existence, and the whole cosmic existence consists of unity and interdependence of these seven cosmic principles and their corresponding worlds or lokas. The Upanishads speak of each of these cosmic worlds having a corresponding sheath or kosha in the human consciousness, and each having its own corresponding faculties. In our present state of human evolution, for the vast majority of humanity, the sheaths and faculties that belong to the higher principles, the higher worlds, the Sat Chit Tapas triple world, as well as the Maharloka, these are highly rudimentary, not yet fully developed, not even formed or conscious or active. But these can be developed and made active, made conscious through a conscious spiritual discipline. This is the assurance, the promise that Indian Adhyatma, Indian spirituality gives to the humanity. And the Vedas tell us that gods are those cosmic powers that help the humanity to develop these higher faculties. These gods are what Sri Aurobindo calls as the children of light, sons of infinite. They are the ones that are invoked to help the human soul rise in consciousness. Let's zoom in and take a little closer look at the place of man in this cosmology. As per the Indian vision of human existence, man and cosmos are built on the same principle and are mutually inclusive of each other. Outwardly, man may seem like an insignificant part of the cosmos, but inwardly he's a miniature representation of that cosmos, and in his inmost self, a direct expression of the eternal divine, a dynamic portion of the divine, equal with the gods. This is the essential truth of man's being, what a human is, as per the Indian vision of human existence. And which also says that the ultimate destiny of man is of becoming one with the divine. And now, more than ever, humanity needs to live and evolve into this truth of its being. So what happens is when this portion of the divine, we call it divine spark or soul, when it comes down upon the earth and inhabits a mortal body, it sort of withdraws behind a veil and takes its stand deep in the heart, deep in the human heart. And this has been experienced and revealed by yogis and mystics everywhere. This divine spark hides there as if in a cave, shrouded by veils after veils of its own life, body, and mind. But interestingly, it is not completely cut off from its source. And from that secret hidden home, it continues to very, very faintly exert its influence on all other parts of the being, which it sees as its outer instruments for expression in the outer life. And this is how gradually, indeed very gradually, the light of this divine spark begins to filter through and begins to purify and illumine the outer parts of man's being. Sri Aurobindo speaks of this truth of human existence beautifully in these 4 lines from his poem titled Life. Even in rags, I am a god. Fallen, I am divine. High, I triumph when downtrodden. Long I live when slain. The other aspect of this Indian vision of human existence is that it is only after millions of lives in what can be spoken of as inferior forms that the secret soul in the universe arrives at humanity. And it is only after hundreds or thousands or perhaps even a million human lives that man can rise into, evolve into his divine self-existence. So each step that a man has on the earth becomes a step that he can take forward or backward in his gradual soul evolution. Now, this brings me to the Indian ideal vision for human perfection, according to which an individual carries in him a potential to become a universal soul, one with the supreme unity, one with all beings. But the normal life of human being, the normal human existence has to be lived through with a conscientious endeavor before the individual is ready to aspire for a deeper supra-existence. So while on the surface, an individual or a man may seem to be like this half-evolved creature with still carrying in him the influence of animal and other rudimentary life forms, that is not his whole being, and certainly that is not his real being. As a dynamic, eternal portion of the divine, an individual is, in his essence, capable to find that inmost reality, that divine spark that we spoke of, and at the same time exceed that outward, apparent, natural self of mind, life, and body. Now, this outward and apparent self is a formation of the nature for a limited time and purpose. That is the ego self that we generally speak of. And it's there for a limited purpose and a limited time, and to be used as a means by nature to help the individual develop his natural powers of mind, life, and body, so that the normal life is lived through. And in the process of living this ordinary life, this sort of normal life in the lower, what we can understand as the lower triple aparadha, the plane of human existence, the individual he tries to acquire as many earthly pleasures as he can, sort of experiencing a mixed bag of a few joys and few sorrows along the way. And in this process, gradually becoming ready to ask the question, to come to a point where the needs, the demands, the cravings of the ego have to be slowly denied. Those claims have to be kept aside so that that ego self is no longer a bar in further progress of the being. And in this process, an individual would come to a point asking the question, what next? Is this all there is to life, or is there something more? Is it something more that I must seek if I am to fulfill myself? Sri Aurobindo gives a wonderful answer to this man's eternal quest. He says that these are actually India's answers, man's continual quest. And what are these answers? These are 3 words, he says. Brahman, Yoga, and Dharma are India's answers to man's continual quest. Then he expands it further. Brahman for the eternal goal of life. Yoga for the means of perfection. and dharma for a rational yet binding law of conduct. And he defines or he qualifies dharma here in the sense of swabhava nityam karma, that is action that is in harmony with or guided by or directed by the innate true nature of the being, swabhava. Let's just again go in deeper into this yoga as the means for perfection that Sri Aurobindo says. But before we do that, let me sort of bring as a reminder for us here uh, the definition that Mother had once given of what perfection is. Perfection, she said, is not a maximum or an extreme. It is an equilibrium and a harmonization. Now, we were speaking earlier of the higher triple world, the parartha, and the lower triple world, aparartha. All that a human individual seeks to acquire, whether it is knowledge, will, force, happiness, love, through all the experiences in this ordinary life that is bound by the ignorance or avidya that is the aspect of, or that is the governing aspect of this existence in the lower triple world, which already has a mixture of truth and error. All that he's seeking are nothing but distortions, or we can call them as limitations of what they are in their true essence in the higher existence, in the higher hemisphere. So the highest knowledge that mind and intellect can attain here is an uncertain and a partial shadow at that of the absolute all-comprehending knowledge that can be attained by a complete identity at the plane of the truth consciousness, which Sri Aurobindo also speaks of as supermind. What we seek here as ordinary love is a poor, highly distorted reflection of the true love of the divine. And because it is colored and clouded by the constant cravings and clingings of our ego self, that ordinary love, that love can hardly be a source or a transformative force for in the world that is full of division and conflict. The constant hunger that we experience for happiness and our constant pursuit of pleasure are darkened forms of the true ananda, the true bliss that our inner, the inmost being seeks. The power or will for effective action that we so passionately pursue here is nothing but our imperfect and hesitating, faltering attempt to seek an alignment with that divine will and force, which is the true force behind all manifestation. The process with which we may arrive at the true nature of all that we seek in ignorance or avidya of this lower existence may be called yoga. The mother had once made a very simple and yet a very profound sketch to illustrate the meaning of yoga, the path of yoga. Yoga is that conscious route which takes the human to the divine through a straight path, whereas in the pursuit of our ordinary living, we traverse the same journey, but through a great zigzag and zigzag of many, many lives. Sri Aurobindo had defined yoga as a means by which one arrives at union with the truth behind things. It's an inner discipline, he said, that leads us from the consciousness of the outward and apparent to the consciousness of inner and real. So in that sense, yoga becomes a change of consciousness. Yoga, he said, the whole meaning of the process of yoga, he said, is a change of consciousness. Now, isn't this change of consciousness supposed to be an individual pursuit? Isn't yoga something by which one gradually arrives at the unity or union with the divine truth in his inmost being, leaving aside the outer being and the outer nature just as it is, and as well as the outer chaotic world, just as it is. There can be many reasons for such a limited and incomplete line of thinking. But the primary one can be that we carry a limited conception of both the world as well as the divine's purpose, very purpose of creation, or the entire manifestation. And Mother had once summarized this quite eloquently, very powerfully, in a remarkable passage where she spoke of three conceptions of the world. The first one, she said, could be understood as the Buddhist or Shankarite conception of the world, according to which the world is an illusion, a field of ignorance and suffering due to ignorance. And the one thing we need to do is to get out of it as soon as possible and to disappear into the original non-existence or non-manifestation. The second conception, she said, is what can be spoken of as the Vedantic Conception as commonly understood, according to which the world is essentially divine, for the divine is omnipresent there, but its exterior expression is distorted, obscure, ignorant, perverted. And the thing to be done is to become conscious of that inner divine and remain fixed in that consciousness, but without troubling about the outer world. For this external world, according to this conception, cannot change and will always be in its natural state of unconsciousness and ignorance. And the third conception that she spoke of is Sri Aurobindonian conception, according to which the world as it is not the divine creation it is meant to be, but rather an obscure and perverted expression of it. It is not the expression of the divine consciousness and will, but this is what it is meant to become. It has been created to develop into a perfect manifestation of the divine under all his forms and aspects, light and knowledge, power, love, and beauty. This, she said, is our conception of the world and the aim we follow. So, in this one little paragraph where she describes the Sri Aurobindonian conception of the world and what it is meant to be, we are already hearing the note of the future destiny of humanity and the world. Our present existence is a creation of mental consciousness, and that is why it is subject to and limited by its present nature, the consciousness of the mind. And as long as the same mental consciousness is the driving force, is the active force, or is the basis of all the adjustments and rethinkings and replannings and reorganizations or revolutions that we have to address the challenges that we are facing as a humanity. All those efforts by the humanity will be good only for a small period of time. And Sri Aurobindo also speaks of that all systems created by the human mind, the human mental consciousness, are bound to fail. So what is needed is a new consciousness, one that is wider, higher, and deeper. That alone will have the key to address the evolutionary crisis that humanity is facing. And this is also a good point to mention that in the Indian tradition, we have a concept of avatarhood. And particularly when we look at the three avatars on the earth plane, the avatar of Parshuram, Sri Ram, and Sri Krishna, there is a clear sign of the progression of consciousness, the evolution of consciousness, and how each of these avatars come on the earth in human form to bring down a new consciousness. So, for example, what Sri Ram tried to do was to bring down the higher, the illumined, the sattvic mentality as the driving force behind all manifestation. And Sri Krishna brings down what Sri Aurobindo speaks of as the overmental, the highest rung of the mind plane of that consciousness. And this gives us a clue to sort of, in the interest of time, I'm not going deeper into the significance of Sri Rama's and Sri Krishna's advent or their avatarhood and their connection with the evolution of consciousness, but rather going into the truth, understanding the significance of the tremendous yogic work of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, their integral yoga, their supramental yoga, because they have brought down on the earth consciousness a new supramental truth consciousness, which is able to manifest a new creation, and at the same time can also accelerate the very pace of the evolutionary process that is working behind this outer march of humanity and the world. So what I will do next is to sort of touch on very few salient points about integral yoga that have direct bearing on our present immediate purpose. One of them being that while in most of the old yogas, the aim has been to draw all together from the outer life and enter into a greater divine truth, where one is no longer living in the consciousness or in the life of mind and the ego, and begins to grow into the truth of one's inmost being, above mind, life, and body. But in integral yoga, the aim is to transform the very mind, life, and body into an expression of that divine truth, and to make the outer as well as the inner life embody it. This is definitely a new turn, and we can say even as an inevitable culmination of the gradual evolution of yoga as a means for perfection. In our last session, we had spoken of the spiritual progression behind the march of the Indian civilization, and we spoke about the various epochs of Vedas, Upanishads, age of Darshanas, Puranas, Bhakti, and Tantra. And we said that each of these are dealing with the conscious shaping and perfecting of one or another layer of man's consciousness. And we said that Tantra the Tantric discipline is that which concerns itself with the illumination of the very physical layer, the very material nature of consciousness. So on one side, we have the Vedic Vedantic realization that speaks to us of the oneness of existence, the one Brahman, Purusha, eternal, that inhabits, rules, and transcends the manifestation. Tantra has been a complementary movement concerned with the truth of the multiplicity of the manifestation, with its focus on release and mastery of the very energies and forces of Prakriti, nature, through their purification and opening into the consciousness of the Divine Mother. Opening to the force of the Divine Mother is the key to the transformation that we said is the aim of integral yoga, because it is essentially the Divine Mother, the executive supramental force of the Supreme, who has the power to create, transform, and recreate. And Prakriti or nature is in truth the lower or the limited form of the divine Shakti, the Para-Prakriti, that drives all the manifestation. So integral yoga, Sri Aurobindo says, is a synthesis of all sides of the truth, the Vedantic and the Tantric. But it does not sort of integrates them or synthesizes them, takes them as they were in the forms that were systemized in earlier ages. But it takes the essence of both of these, of all sides of the truth, and raises them to their highest and fullest significance. So while integral yoga has its own forms and processes to integrate the Vedantic and the Tantric disciplines, there are some aspects of the Tantric yoga that are fundamental to integral yoga, such as the idea of ascent of consciousness, and also that nothing can be done except through the descent of the force of the Divine Mother, the Shakti. Opening to the force and light of the Divine Mother, in fact, and surrender to her are at the very heart of the practice of integral yoga. So the aim of integral yoga that we've been speaking of is not only to rise out of the ordinary world consciousness, the ignorant world consciousness, into the divine consciousness, but to bring down the supramental power of that divine consciousness down into the ignorance of mind, life, and body, and to transform them, to manifest the divine hair and to create a divine life in matter. The concern of integral yoga is with all life, and it's aimed at a complete change of consciousness to transform the life to its truer essence, not merely connecting the lower with the higher, but rather transforming the lower to its higher, truer essence through a descent of the higher consciousness and force. So essentially, it is only by a change of consciousness that we can discover the true basis of true life for humanity and the world. At the cosmic level, this change of consciousness is about the change from mind to supermind as the founding principle of all creation, all manifestation. And as we know, on the evening of 29th February 1956, during a collective meditation with the mother in the ashram playground, a stupendous event happened, which we can say opened the gateway for the next future of the earth consciousness. The manifestation of the supramental in the earth consciousness was achieved. About a year and a half later, on 24th July 1957, Mother described the true significance of this great spiritual event, and she said, this is the beginning of a new world. She said that up to now, all that has manifested of the divinity is this world as we know it, our present world. This is a mental world, she said, and its apex and prototype is man, the mental being. And then she added, but the manifestation is boundless. And after this world, another reality has to manifest, which Sri Aurobindo calls the supermind, because that is, in a sense, in fact, in truth, the next step after the mind. So when we see that new world from the standpoint of our present world, it is naturally supramental because it is something above the mind. And then she explained further. So far, she said, the whole creation belonged to the lower hemisphere, the upper ardha that the Veda speaks of, which is governed by ignorance and is based upon the inconscient. Whereas the other world, the other one, the new world, will be a complete reversal of that. Instead of being based on ignorance or avidya, it will be based on truth, the sat, the truth consciousness. That is why it will be truly a new world, she added. But will this new world have anything to do with the old as we currently know it? Will it be some sort of a transformed world out of the present world? The mother answered that as well. And she said, but if this ascends, the principle of this new world, were not included in the world as we know at present, there would be no hope of this one being transformed into the other. What we would have instead would be two worlds, totally different and opposed to each other with no possibility of contact between them. But that's not the case. And then she explained further. She said that in its essence, the principle of the new is already enclosed, involved in the old world. So essentially, it is there inside, in its very depths, hidden, invisible, unexpressed, but it is there in its essence. And then she added further, explaining the significance of the event of 29 February 1956 by saying that unless from the supreme heights, the supramental consciousness and force and light manifest directly in the world, as it happened a year and a half ago, referring to the date of 29 February 1956, this supermind in principle, which is at the very bedrock of the material world, would never have any possibility of manifesting itself. So essentially what we have here is a divine declaration, a revelation of a stupendous inner movement in what we have been speaking of is a progressive unfolding of the truth in manifestation. And this manifestation of this supramental consciousness, which has activated the principle of supermind that the mother says is at the bedrock of the base of the matter, is a decisive action from the Supreme. That is why the mother once said that now the material nature has become a willing collaborator to the call of the spirit to transform life. And again, I may add here just in passing that in Indian tradition, this union of material nature with the divine has been symbolized in the divine marriage of Ma Parvati with Lord Shiva. And in the Rig Veda also, we find a legend of the divine Shakti, the consciousness of the Supreme, plunging down into the inconscient, hiding herself from where she's brought back by the gods to unite with the Brahman, to unite with the divine. So what we see here is that essentially the aim that the tantric discipline had for itself, the mastery over the powers of material nature, has found its apex and culmination in this descent of the supramental truth consciousness. Because it is this consciousness that has the power not merely to master the material nature, but to rather transform the material nature. And that is what makes all the difference. It's sort of like a leap ahead. So while the Tantra still aimed at the release from life, the supramental yoga aims at transformation of life. This colossal work required the advent of the dual avatar of Ishvara and Shakti on the earth. This is the real significance of the collaborative yogic work, the collaborative supramental yoga of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. Only when the transcendent creatrix of the universe, the Supreme Divine Mother herself, comes down and takes upon herself the charge of manifesting the higher truth consciousness on earth, a new creation can begin. This is the real significance of the Mother's final coming to India on 24th April 1920. Now, this supramental consciousness, which the Veda speaks of as the Maharloka, the link world, is working on the earth. A new creation is slowly taking shape in the subtle realms. All the chaos and conflict that we see around could be understood as nothing but the signs of the old creation trying to assert itself. And we can already see some clear signs of how the new consciousness force is working. We can see a growing yearning, a greater yearning for life beyond the ordinary life of bodily pleasures and material gains and mental gains in growing sections of humanity. We can also see that after having enjoyed the gains of material comfort, security that result from the age of reason, the age of scientific and technological advancement, more and more people are seeking something deeper, something higher. In fields of pursuits, in fields of human activity, such as in education, health and wellness, arts, design, the catchword, the buzzword is subjectivism, a greater subjective approach. So what we can say is that there are signs of a slow but clear progression or a change of consciousness that is working behind the march of humanity from an age of reason to a truer, deeper inner subjectivism, and very, very slowly to an age of seeking supramental or some kind of spiritual or supra-rational truth of life. The question becomes is then, how does this movement from rational to supra-rational or spiritual, what does it mean to address the challenges that we face today? And as we can see that in our present mental creation, in our present mental existence, humanity has been trying to address the various challenges. And I need not list any of those challenges. We are quite aware of those. So the attempt of humanity has been to address them using different mind-based approaches, whether it is by enacting all kinds of laws, creating a set of policies, institutionalized structures, practices, and promoting all the right secular values of freedom, equality, universal education, democracy, liberty, human rights, etc. And also at the same time lending its weight to the nobler ideals such as compassion for life and nature, peace, non-violence, etc. And yet nothing seems to be working. What might be missing there? So let's just take one example here, the challenge of human unity. In one essay, in an earlier essay, Sri Aurobindo had written about the future of humanity. And he said that the future of humanity requires a reawakening of the old spirituality, the old spiritual practicality. That's the phrase he used, spiritual practicality of the East. And he was particularly referring to India. So the need, what the future of humanity needs is to reawaken the old spiritual practicality and the large and profound vision of the East. These were at the core of the Indian view of life and progress. And synthesizes or sort of infusing this Indian large and profound vision and Indian spiritual practicality with the light of a greater power of organization, which is sort of the essential strength of the West. And together these two, the synthesis of these two will yield new forms of action, forms and force and influence that can help humanity advance further. Now, in this, we can see that he's giving us this great vision of bringing together the best of the East or the best of the West, the spiritual practicality and the large and profound vision from the East, and the great power of organization of the West. But quite understandably, we know that he's not speaking of a mental ideal of human unity, because all mental ethical ideals are easily broken at the very first shock from life's complexities, circumstances. A mental ideal of unity that will be based on the mental consciousness will be unable to handle diversity without imposing a certain mental idea of homogeneity or uniformity. The truer unity based on the truth consciousness will not impose uniformity, and at the same time will also not accept abuse and disrespect of all that is different and unknown. A deeper unity will not eradicate diversity, but will also not allow inhumanity and mindless destruction of all that is good, beautiful, true, and humane, simply in the name of this mind-based postmodernistic relativism of all beliefs being equal. This true unity based on the consciousness of truth will not come easily, will not come simply by being politically correct. It will require sincere action. It will require a great deal of sincerity and honesty, of intention, of action, of rising above the pettiness of this tendency and the lower tendency of dominating and control. Serious work, of course, will be required on national, international, educational, social, political levels. But most importantly, the work will have to be done at the level of consciousness. The spiritual practicality that Sri Aurobindo was speaking of would insist on a change of consciousness as the basis for that unity. It would involve a gradual progression, a shift away from the mind's natural tendency to create binaries and divisions toward a more integrative and harmonizing tendency of that inmost self in our being, what in integral yoga is referred to as the psychic being, the Chaitya Purusha, or the soul in evolution. Because it is this psychic presence that always points us towards what is true, right, and beautiful, towards love and harmony, and all that is a divine possibility in us. And it persists till these things become the major need of our nature. So this change of consciousness involves getting more and more in contact with that inmost self, that psychic presence, that divine spark within. This is the first step of all, whatever paths that we have in Indian, this growing evolutionary Indian spirituality, right from Vedic yoga to the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. In sort of like more applied or more practical terms, what this essentially means is for individuals to become more and more conscious of all that is happening within, of their inner movements, their intentions, impulsions, choices, decisions, actions, so that one is gradually prepared to listen to those faint whispers of that inmost self, the divine spark that is still connected with its source, as we said earlier, because it is that psychic presence that guides us towards unity and harmony. This would be the truth consciousness's way of achieving true human unity. So essentially what we are saying here is that only a deeper inward turn to the higher truth of one's true self, when combined with nishkam karma, a truly disinterested action that is not impelled by any desire or craving of the ego, and at the same time has no preference for any particular outcome, can be the true basis for a true spiritual practicality, or working towards perfecting life and world. Only with a progressive heightening, deepening, and widening of our consciousness, we as individuals, societies, and nations can be guided more and more by the uniting and harmonizing tendencies of that inmost self, instead of the separative, divisive, and egoistic tendencies of the mind. But unfortunately, what has been happening in our present times is that all these great ideals of freedom, equality, liberty, unity, all of them have been sort of distorted and corrupted. So, for example, the term progressive has come to mean merely a rejection of all the wisdom that comes from the past. Being liberal has come to mean accepting this idea of anything goes, all under the guise of these values of freedom, liberty, and equality. Spiritual practicality that bases itself on the change of consciousness, that is the shift away from the mind to that being guided more and more by that inmost self, will not fall into the trap of this simplistic binary thinking. Through a touch of the light from the above, or sort of having a lasting contact with the psychic within, one would begin to realize the deeper truth of these nobler values of freedom, equality, liberty, harmony, unity, beyond the intellectualization of any of these ideals. So the supposed value neutrality of the postmodernist, that is the result of the mental consciousness, that is also sort of in contradiction to one of the essential tenets of any spiritual path, which emphasizes the development of a clear sense of discernment, vivek, that once was defined by Sri Aurobindo as intuitive and inspired judgment gained by a previous purification of the organs of thought and knowledge. It is this vivek buddhi, this ability to sincerely and honestly distinguish between truth and falsehood, between dharma and adharma. That's the prerequisite before being ready to listen to the whispers of the psychic presence within. And gradually elevating oneself from this faculty of vivek to one that is based in an even more perfect divine wisdom, which has a greater certitude of knowing, that is also attained by this progressive rise of consciousness. Mother had once, again, in a remarkable passage, spoken about how the growth of mind, how the growth of mental powers in humanity has, on one side, led to much gains for humanity as a whole. But at the same time, it has also resulted in a kind of a loss of that simplicity, that innocence, that healthy candor of earlier ages, when people lived closer to nature and knew less about playing with mental ideals. This, she said, has brought humanity to a dangerous turning point. As a solution to the general degradation, often what is preached is to go back to the past, a return to the simplicity of the past. But she added quite emphatically, which is that this is quite impossible. One cannot go back. The only solution is to advance further. She added, we must go farther on, must advance, climb together, climb greater heights and go beyond the arid search for pleasure and personal welfare through the development of a new sense of beauty, a thirst for truth and light, through understanding that it is only by widening yourself, illumining yourself, setting yourself ablaze with the ardor for progress that you can find both integral peace and enduring happiness. One must rise up and widen. Rise up and widen. This is the progressive change of consciousness that is needed for the future of humanity. So, the age of ascetic in a cave far away from the maddening crowd of life, so to speak, has been slowly giving way to an age of yoga in real life, in real time, which aims at the transformation of one's entire being, the life and the world. We can see a dawn of a new age of universal spirituality when man aspires for a greater widening, deepening, and heightening of consciousness and seeks spiritual experience in its original purity, above and beyond all religions, which strives toward a global truth and teaches us to enter into a direct relation with the divine. That will be the basis of a new world, a new creation founded on the supramental truth consciousness. And therein lies the true future of humanity. So as I come near the end of this second Darshan talk to celebrate the Divine Mother's second and final coming to Pondicherry, and as we just saw the event, this was an event of great significance for Earth and humanity. I'm tempted to read a few lines from the great Mantric poem of Sri Aurobindo, Savitri. These are from a long passage in book 11, and I'm not going to read the whole passage that runs from page 702 to 710, but I'll just read a few lines and skip several in between. But I choose these lines because here we have an assurance by the Supreme that now that Divine Mother has come on the earth as an avatar, with her force working directly at matter, right into the inconscient, all will be transformed into their essential truth. We also get a glimpse in these lines of new creation founded on that truth consciousness, when where the forerunners of a new humanity, a new race will walk on earth. This is truly the divine's assurance for the future of humanity. So I begin. But when the hour of the divine draws near, the mighty mother shall take birth in time, and God be born into the human clay, in forms made ready by your human lives. Then shall the truth supreme be given to men. I repeat, but when the hour of the divine draws near, the mighty mother shall take birth in time, and God be born into the human clay, in forms made ready by your human lives. Then shall the truth supreme be given to men. Then a few lines down, we have the incarnate dual power shall open God's door. Eternal supermind touch earthly time. The superman shall wake in mortal man and manifest the hidden demigod, or grow into the God light and God force, revealing the secret deity in the cave. And then further down, he writes, a mightier race shall inhabit the mortal's world, on nature's luminous tops, on the spirit's ground. The superman shall reign as the king of life, make earth almost the mate and peer of heaven, and lead towards God and truth man's ignorant heart, and lift towards Godhead his mortality. Further down, a greater truth than earth's shall roof in earth, and shed its sunlight on the roads of mind. A power infallible shall lead the thought, a seeing puissance govern life and act, in earthly hearts kindle the immortal's fire. All earth shall be the spirit's manifest home, hidden no more by the body and the life, hidden no more by the mind's ignorance. An unerring hand shall shape event and act. The spirit's eyes shall look through nature's eyes. The spirit's force shall occupy nature's force. And then the passage goes on to express rich and marvelous truth vision, the drishti of a Maharishi, an avatar of the beautiful new creation that awaits humanity. Ours is a civilization that has always chanted this prayer, Lokaha samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings in all worlds be happy and at ease. And it is from here, again, this land of Bharat, we have the dual avatars of our times, giving us the assurance and promise of a new creation and a new world that is built on truth. Nature shall live to manifest secret God. The spirit shall take up the human play. This earthly life become life divine. Namaste and thank you.